men who, sex traffickers, pimps, boyfriends who push and force their girlfriends or wives or victims to the abortion clinic. These women are truly victims, and the people that we should be prosecuting are the boyfriends, the husbands, these abusive men that do this to women. This is not about putting women in jail. This is about protecting babies.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Victor Nieves, president of Life Issues Institute. There's a heated debate right now in the pro-life movement over whether pro-life laws should also apply to the mother of the child who is aborted. One side contends that because women are often lied to by medical professionals, mothers who abort their children are either victims or just simply should not be prosecuted for an abortion. The other side believes that since the mother is complicit in the killing of her child, she should be prosecuted just like anyone else involved in the killing of a child. Today we'll be hearing from both sides of this discussion as we're joined first by Raimundo Rojas. He's the Director of Outreach at the National Right to Life Committee, where he has served since 1991. On the other side, we're joined by AJ Hurley, a national speaker, activist, and the national organizer of outreach for the White Rose Resistance. AJ and Raimundo, welcome to the show. Well, Ray and AJ, this is such an important topic. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, for our listener, I want to issue just a quick disclaimer before we jump into this conversation, just by saying that both Ray and AJ have given their lives. They have dedicated their lives to the pro-life movement. We're on the same team here, but it's natural when we're fighting side by side that occasionally we will run into differences of opinions. We might have different ideas about how we move forward. And so our goal today isn't to have a knives out debate or to be going at each other's throats, but to kind of work through a pretty hot topic issue, understanding that we're on the same team here. So Ray and AJ, to set the stage just a little bit, the question has come up, and it's being discussed more and more, as to whether or not mothers who get an abortion should face legal consequences. So I want to give both of you the opportunity, just as an intro, to share your thoughts on how we address that question moving forward. Ray, we'll start with you.
I think that what's central to the pro-life movement is that we believe in value and dignity of both mother and child, obviously. And I'm here to say that if we begin to criminalize women who have had abortions, and it's counterproductive to the movement, it's ineffective, I think it's unjust. We have to look at who the real enemy is, and those are the abortion providers. I mean, I've never really thought, as AJ mentioned, in the late 80s and early 90s, I was putting myself at risk of arrest several times sitting in front of an abortion clinic. And we prayed for those moms before and after they made it through those doors. But I've never really thought of aborted women as the second victim. I've been working in Right to Life since the late 80s. I graduated college. I'd gotten a really great job with a Fortune 500 firm. And in late 80s, I was convicted to do something for unborn children. And I've never thought of aborted women as victims. I've always had a hard time with that language. Understand that that's where I come from, and that I've seen all the videos. I've seen the TikToks. I've seen the Instagrams where young women celebrate before having an abortion. They dance in front of the obituary. They twerk inside the room where their child is about to be dismembered, and then they celebrate it afterwards. So I don't think these women are victims. Most of them are not entitled to that moniker. Are there some women who are pushed into an abortion without wanting to? Yes, I know some of those women. There are very few of those women. In 2025, women who have abortions, I think for the most part, they know what they're doing. But that doesn't mean that we put them in jail. That means that we need to double, triple, quadruple our efforts to reach them in their place of need so that they do not go through with the abortion.
AJ, what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, thank you so much, Ray. A huge respect to you. Your dedication and sacrifice to this movement is undeniable. There's no question there. We are brothers in this fight. I don't consider you an enemy at all just because you don't think differently on this. I think we want the same thing. And the question is, how do we get there? How do we protect preborn children from the violence of abortion, right? So first of all, I want to put a few clarifying statements out there. What I do not want is to retroactively go back and prosecute anyone for abortions in the past. That would be unjust. You can't punish somebody for something that was completely legal and celebrated by society at the time, right? And I don't think that every woman who gets an abortion should be punished either. So there are some women, as Ray already admitted, that are true victims. Men who, sex traffickers, pimps, boyfriends who push and force their girlfriends or wives or victims to the abortion clinic. These women are truly victims. And the people that we should be prosecuting are the boyfriends, the husbands, these abusive men that do this to women. And so I want to make it that very, very clear. I don't want any woman to go to jail. And I actually kind of don't love how this is even framed, because this is not about putting women in jail. This is about protecting babies. And anyone, regardless, it could be a man, it could be a doctor, it could be the woman, and the justice system. That's the job of the justice system, is just to determine, hey, who is culpable? And everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty. So that's the beauty of our laws, is that our legal system counts everyone as innocent until they're proven guilty. And there's a high demand of proof. And what do you due process? I'm a huge believer in due process. I do not believe that we should be going and inspecting every single type of miscarriage. These are straw mans of my position. I just think that the same laws that protect you and I, if we say that human beings have the same value and dignity, should protect the unborn child also.
I can understand and respect that. But the thing that we look at, and honestly, the bill that triggered this huge support within the pro-life movement to distance ourselves and actually say we don't at all support this kind of law, was the 2022 legislation that came out of Louisiana. And the minute that law was introduced, remember the environment in which this law was introduced, the draft of the Dobbs decision had been leaked, and there was a real possibility, and it turned out that there was, that we overturned Roe. And legislators in Louisiana came forth and put this bill together. And it caused a great deal of distress within the pro-life movement, because we felt, that's not representative of our view in its sum. It was House Bill 813. What this did was, and we saw it immediately, and it's one of the greatest concerns that we have, is what the other side will do with something like this. We obviously believe that life begins at conception. There is no question that is a human being. I'm preaching to the choir if I enumerate all the reasons why that's a human being. I'm not going to do that. However, on that day, the pro-life movement just sort of exploded. I was in DC at the time, and more than 70 people or organizations contacted the National Right to Life Committee and says, what are we going to do about this? So we crafted a letter saying that we don't. We, at no point will we ever support a law that criminalizes women who have had abortions. And the reasons are many. There are judicial reasons. As you said, from that original 2022 law that was introduced in Louisiana, that law has changed and morphed, and some language taken out, other language included. Honestly, most of our lawyers and the lawyers across, constitutional lawyers, these are pro-life lawyers who work on the Constitution, say that this law is just legally untenable, because as mild as the law is made in its language, there is conflict with the Constitution. There's conflict on how a state could go on with this in contradiction to federal law. That's an Article 6 issue, right? The states can't supersede a federal law, which it would happen. There are 14th Amendment issues with the law as well. So legally, it would be incredibly difficult to make this law stick. And we have tried to be a mindset of a devil's advocate. What judge would support this? And what legislature would pass this? One of the reasons that this has now become an issue again is that we're seeing people going across the country saying, we've got to do this, we've got to do this, we've got to do this. Unfortunately, they're not as articulate as Mr. Hurley and don't come across the way he's telling us from the heart what it is he's feeling. But this is a PR nightmare for the pro-life movement, this kind of mentality. We have so much to do. And anything that takes focus away from the unborn child, and I know you would say, no, well, this puts all the focus. Well, yeah, it does. But we would then be arguing, and we've seen it. We've now seen it at legislatures. We've seen it in our workshops. We've seen it at our rallies, where we have to stop talking about the unborn child, the humanity of the unborn child, and begin to defend our position as to why women shouldn't be put in jail for having an abortion.
Okay, so one of the things that you had clarified was that you believe that basically giving preborn children the same protection that you and I have is counterproductive, ineffective, unjust, and that at no
I didn't
point.
say that. This law does those things, not giving protection to unborn children. That is our goal. Our goal is to protect unborn children. This law that criminalizes and penalizes women who are having abortions is not the way to go. That's the problem.
Maybe so for clarifying perspective here, maybe I can go back. What I said just a moment ago was the idea that unborn children should have the same protections as you and I.
Is our goal.
So, Ray, how then can we make sure that we're protecting the unborn with the same rights as you and I would get if the mothers can take their life without any legal consequences?
Because that's not the way we do it. There's no
How do we protect?
We protect by being the woman, by making abortion unthinkable. National Right to Life started in the 1960s. We then faced Roe v. Wade, and we had 50 years to change the culture on abortion. We have failed. I don't think that putting women in jail is how you influence the culture.
That's fine. I'm trying to get clarity here, right? So you and I want the same thing, to protect unborn children from the violence of abortion. You think it's unjust to put laws that would give them the same protection as you and I. So how do we protect these children? Like, for instance, let's take it out of this whole realm of the civil rights issue that is before us. And let's take it back to our previous civil rights issue that was threatening other type of persons that didn't have equal protection. You mentioned the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was not only designed to protect human beings that had the black color skin, but it was also designed to protect other human beings in future because they recognized, hey, we have a system in place where, look, the very rights that were guaranteed to us, and not only the Fifth Amendment, but the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with inalienable rights, such as the right to life, right? Then you have the whole class of human beings who were equal humans, but some humans were not as equal as other humans. So the 14th Amendment said no state shall deprive any person of life or liberty without due process of law, right? So you had mentioned that this is untenable, that legal scholars don't agree with this. I mean, I could point to Josh Craddock as a Harvard legal scholar. He wrote 14th Amendment equal protection as the North Star for the pro-life movement, in which he believes that the end goal is 14th Amendment protections for unborn children. We have Bradley Pierce, who's working on legislation. He also is a constitutional scholar. Both of them have put forth this very simple premise that the same laws and protections enumerated by the Constitution and due process of you and I also apply to the unborn children. So what I'm not understanding here is it seems like you and I agree that unborn children have the right to life, that they should have the constitutional rights that you and I have. What I'm trying to understand is if you believe that, how can you deny them the due process that you and I have?
Let me ask you this, because this is one of the problems that we've encountered every time we've seen this law pop up. It shrouds itself in fakeness. I would like to ask you, what legislature, what in any of the states, pick a state, do you think would pass this law?
That's a practical question. I just want to understand fundamentally, it seems like we have a fundamental dogma here that, whether or not we can get it done is a different question as to whether or not we should provide them due process.
The question has to be, where can you get this done? Why is so much energy going towards something that it will not happen in our lifetimes, if ever? I cannot imagine one single state legislature who would even allow this law to go beyond committee, similarly to what we saw in Louisiana, because it's unattainable. It is just not ever going to pass. You are not going to find politicians en masse. You might find a handful in each state who would be willing to take this on, to take this position on. And to what end? I mean, we can certainly talk about our efforts to try to save children's lives, but by coaching it within a law that will never see the light of day, that it will never pass for a whole number of reasons, I don't understand not discussing the practicality. So much effort and energy and resources are being siphoned to fight something that will just not happen. And it seems to me that someone needs to face that. People who are espousing this at some point need to say, this is never going to happen. Why am I tearing down at the right to life movement in general for something that's just, I'll say it again, it's unattainable? Why do that?
I think one of the places that we're kind of reaching a crossroads is the juxtaposition between what we would love to see in a perfect world and what is most practical. And I can see this just a bit of a devil's advocate in both directions. I think we've established we all want the unborn. They're human beings. So obviously we want our perfect end goal is that there would be no abortions, that there would not be, innocent children losing their lives in the womb. That's our perfect end goal. We also live within a political reality. And so we do have those practical questions. And so AJ, a bit of devil's advocate in your direction here is what concerns do you have if, for example, a state like Texas was to spearhead a piece of equal protection legislation? What concerns, if any, do you have that may cause something of a domino effect pragmatically, politically, where maybe it hurts us, for example, in a midterm election, and next thing you know, we have federal legislation that's passed by the pro-abortion lobby that ends up trampling us or something like that? Because we do have to be aware of a political calculus that does, whether we like it or not, it does exist. And so is there any concern there that by spearheading some of this legislation, there's a chance we actually hurt ourselves in the long run?
Yeah, totally. That's always the case. And look, I'm not going to pretend like we can just wave a magic wand and get this done, right? I mean, we look back at the time of the slavery age, and how in the world, the abolitionists were asking themselves, how in the world could we ever live in a day where Black human beings made in the image of God would ever have the same rights and protections that everyone else does, that white people do? This is completely politically unfeasible. The gay rights movement was asking this 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the pro-LGBT agenda polled Americans, and they said that some polls showed up over 80% of Americans, but most of the polls showed at least 70% of Americans just 10 years ago, before Obergefell, polled that 70% of Americans did not agree with gay marriage. They had a massive cultural uphill battle to fight this. And we always say politics is downstream of culture, but let's not forget the reality that, as we as Christians know, that the law is a tutor. And what happened, ironically, was that Obergefell passed that. They did not let that be a roadblock to dissuade them from pushing political initiatives, because they realized that if you enshrine something, that will have downstream effect also. And look at America now. It's not even been 10 years, and there's not hardly a single GOP person that would disagree with gay marriage. Look, I'm not just broad brushing this or hand waving this. As Christians, we deal with faithfulness. We fight against the cultural tide, knowing that, look, duty is ours, results are God's, but the fact of the political reality is now. Roe has been overturned. The Dobbs decision kicked this back to the people and their elected representative. And now we have a situation where, yes, I know that I'm not going to get this done in Nevada, in California, New York, Illinois, right? But what's occurring right now, and just so the readers understand, places where we can get this done, places like Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, what's occurring is 70% of babies are being killed with self-managed abortions at home. And the pro groups like, I hate to say it, but groups like National Right to Life, Susan B. Anthony List, are the ones that are lobbying with the pro-abortion side to close these loopholes by making it actually illegal for everyone involved. And I'm just saying, look, political realities aside, the only thing that's stopping that is the GOP.
What is it that you said Susan B. Anthony and National Right to Life are lobbying with the pro-aborts?
Okay, this is happening right now in South Carolina. So I've been working with Richard Cash this last few months. We have a bill that would make abortion a separate crime. It would take IVF, birth control off the table. It would make it a separate crime, and say that anyone who kills a baby, mother, father, whoever it is, grandparent, pimp, would have a maximum penalty. Maximum penalty. No one would get this, up to 30 years. And
And what is the status of that?
it just got killed by the pro-life community.
Okay, but do you understand why?
Abortion Federation that came up and lobbied the GOP to kill this bill, it was groups like National Right to Life.
That bill would be a win for the pro-aborts. I mean, understand that it would take one 18-year-old girl going to jail, crying after being sentenced to God knows how many years in jail, and everything that we have done in 6 years to show Planned Parenthood to be the murderous organization that it is, all that would evaporate, because now they're the sympathetic empathetic ones. They're the ones speaking. We have to be careful.
It seems like what you're telling me, though, is that we can never end abortion. I mean, well, you said it.
Let me hop in real quick. And so I think, Ray, to the point that you're making is, again, that of the pragmatic, because it is true to say that if there was a video that went viral of an 18-year-old girl scared, crying, upset, she's being hauled away, perp walked, whatever it might would be, the abortion industry would latch on to that like white on rice. They would run with that. It would be on every major commercial in every political election. It would be, all over the place. And so that is a legitimate concern. And I think one of the places where that is so off-putting to many in the pro-life movement specifically is because over the last 50, 60 years, there has been a very intentional, concentrated effort, Ray, like you were saying, to shift the view of the pro-life movement, to ensure that women who are in that position of they're afraid, they don't know what to do, they're in need, to make them feel like they can come to the pro-life movement, that we love them, that we're actually going to take care of them, that we're not going to do anything crazy to hurt them or anything like that. And so there's been some goodwill that has been built by the pro-life movement over the years. And I think, Ray, I don't want to put words in your mouth here. I think a lot of the concern that you're expressing is that we would lose that goodwill that we've fought really, really hard to get with those women. And I think that that's a completely valid concern. AJ, I think it's also a very valid concern. And this is why I think this conversation is so important to have, because, we do get the crux of a really important issue here. And there is the politically pragmatic. There's also the fact that we do want to see abortion end. And AJ, it sounds like your concern is that if we aren't willing to take that final step, we will never fully end abortion. Is that kind of where you're coming from?
Let me say something.
Certainly.
At the last time AJ spoke, he was talking about slavery and how there was a point in time when no one could possibly imagine that African Americans would be free, voting, millionaires, billionaires. He spoke about how the polling with the gay marriage evolved over time. And that is absolutely true. Slavery ended because of incrementalism, because of baby steps. If any brilliant articles have been written, books have been written on how President Lincoln came about getting these amendments passed, freeing the slaves, we didn't go from African Americans in the cotton field to African Americans owning business, voting rights in one fell swoop. That did not happen. That took years and years and years of incrementalism. And the incrementalism included changing the culture, making people see African Americans for what their humanity was. The same thing is said with the Obergefell decision. That was the culmination of what the pro-homosexual movement had been doing for 30 years. They changed the culture incrementally. They would go to one state and they would legalize marriage there. But most importantly is that they changed America's heart and mind by using the culture, social media. I cannot imagine a moment where those who propose that women be criminalized get to that point. It is rejected so abjectly by all vast majority of pro-life. The sentiments that women should be put in jail for having had an abortion. We've got to work the culture. This law passes in a state, which I don't see it happening anytime this kind of law would pass. This passes and we lose. We lose everything. We lose the culture. We lose our laws. We've got a law in Florida right now, the heartbeat bill, which the same folks who are proposing this type of legislation opposed here in Florida. I know because I was at the state capitol and the abolitionists fought us tooth and nail. I mean, a little while ago, we were told that National Right to Life was lobbying on the same side as the pro-aborts. Well, I'm here to tell you that more often than not, my experience in the states, the red states that have had fights to get things like the heartbeat bill passed, it's the abolitionists siding with Planned Parenthood to fight these bills. Since we've passed our heartbeat bill in Florida, since the Florida Supreme Court upheld it, we've seen a 40% drop in abortions in Florida. 40%. But that bill was objected to by the abolitionists here in Florida. So we keep talking about pragmatism and we're talking about what is practical. And it's really easy, to say that we're building a culture of life, but that culture has to be tangible. It has to be practical. We have to be able to see it.
And so, Ray, as a quick follow-up to that, I want to ask because we may actually find a point of common ground here. I'm just asking as a point of clarification. I don't want to lead the question. But Ray, when we talk about whether or not someday we could ever get this passed, we mentioned some of the examples of things that have changed, but obviously it would take a lot. I would agree with you, Ray, right now. The culture in many cases is not where it needs to be. That's why we need to fundamentally shift the culture. But I'm curious in the idea.
And we don't do that by having a visual, the optics of a girl being put in jail for having had an abortion is not ideal.
So my question, Ray, where we may find a bit of common ground is, even if it's not today, even if it's not tomorrow, is there a time down the road where you would say the end goal should be that we protect the unborn no matter who kills them, which would include, anyone, no matter if it was a boyfriend, a doctor, or the mother who took the pill herself?
That's our position now.
But at some point down the road, would you support legislation that would enact a criminal punishment to anyone, including the mother, or is that off the table forever?
As far as the 70 plus pro-life organizations who signed on to National Right to Life's letter in 2022, I can honestly say that we would never, ever support any law that criminalizes women. It is not what the pro-life movement is. We are not about putting women in jail. We are about meeting women where their needs are. And that's where we have failed. We have failed the culture, and we have failed women by meeting their needs, by making abortion unthinkable. That's what we have to fight for. We have got to fight to make abortion unthinkable in the mind of every girl or every woman who thinks that it's a possibility. It isn't. We have failed to do that. That's our responsibility. To say otherwise I think it's just pride speak. But that's where our efforts need to be, not in fighting pro-life legislators who know that any bill that criminalizes women is a boom for the abortion industry.
And AJ, we'll throw it back to you real quick. I promise.
Okay.
But anyway, my next question for you, Ray, and then we'll go back to AJ, is once upon a time, I think there was a lot of agreement within the pro-life movement that the person who should be punished is the abortionist. And I think that this is a point of common ground that you and AJ would certainly share, is that the abortionist, the guy who claims to be a doctor or the gal who claims to be a doctor that would go and dismember a child, yeah, that person, they ought to be in prison, no question. That's my position. Maybe people would disagree. But, you hear these stories of somebody who's taken the life of 30,000 children. Obviously, as we talked about, you can't do an ex post facto law. So we're not talking about people who, but, going forward in the world of what ought to be, that I think we could all agree. What do you think, Ray, because this is something that troubles me a bit, what do you think about the statistics that we're seeing now that the abortionists themselves, the medical professional, they're no longer the ones doing the abortion in many cases because of the prevalence of the chemical abortion. So now, in a way, the abortuary is a bathroom and the abortionist is the woman who's taking the pill. How do we stop that from happening? What is the answer to ensure that those babies are protected as well?
We need to stop shield laws, whether that be on the legislative level, possibly to do in states like Illinois, New York, and California, where shield laws are the law of the land. Their abortionists are protected by state laws. This is something that we've been working on like almost every day, looking for a case to get this. And oddly enough, it'll probably come out of Louisiana before it comes out of Texas. But those are the two states in the best position right now to challenge shield laws. We need to stop that because shield laws protect those who profit from poisoning our babies. And we need to stop that. And we are on that at every single day.
And then one last, and then we'll go to AJ. We would all agree, for example, that if a boyfriend was to force, and we just heard a story out of Ohio, where there was a doctor, actually, funny enough, who is alleged, I got to make sure for legal reasons, he was alleged to have held down his girlfriend and forced her to take the chemical abortion drug. That guy should go to jail, is my position on that. So if he was to kill the unborn child, I think that he should go to jail. But a place where I'm concerned that we might show some hypocrisy if we're not willing to do an equal protection law is if a mother was to drown her 2-year-old in a bathtub, she should go to jail for that. And so,
yeah, and that's not the first time that question's been posed. I think the girl's name was Susan Smith. Midwest, was having an affair outside of marriage. She put her 4-year-old and her toddler in the back seat. I'm sure you remember the story. She drove the vehicle into a lake. Both of those kids drowned. She made up some cockamamie story about being at a traffic, whatever. She gets caught up all in her lies. Everything comes out. So I was asked this question by a reporter. Says, if you think a pro-abortion reporter, baiting, if you think she should go to jail for killing those two kids, her 4-year-old and toddler, and if you believe that a child is also a human, which I do, why not the woman who's had an abortion? And here's the God's honest answer. And I believe the answer to be true today as it was a couple of years ago when this was posed to me. Susan Smith hadn't been programmed for 40 years. 40 years she's been hearing on television, in the news, in the movies, in her newspapers and magazines that abortion was acceptable, that unborn children aren't human. She was conditioned. Women who have abortions have been conditioned for 50 plus years that it's just a clump of cells. We have failed to reach them to tell them that that's not true. They've been conditioned that it's just a simple procedure. We have failed at telling them that. Susan Smith Smith or that woman who kills a 2-year-old, she knows well that that 2-year-old should not be killed. So it's not hypocrisy in any sense when we are fighting 60 years of culture, 60 years of women being told that that clump in cells is just that, a clump in cells, disposable, and not worthy of any kind of protection.
Well, AJ, as promised, we'll throw it back to you.
So, so much to respond to. There's the abolitionist thing, incremental thing, the cultural reality of this, and then the practical on the ground things in Florida. So first of all, I'm not an abolitionist. I do believe in incremental processes to get along the way. I just want to make that clear. It's not an all or nothing approach for me. But let's be clear here. What Ray is not saying is that we need to incrementally make abortion a crime for everyone who kills a human being in the womb. What he's saying is we will never make it a crime. And the pro-life movement is ideologically will never support. At no point is the paper actually says from National Right to Life. At no point will we ever believe in criminal sanctions for mothers who willfully kill their preborn children. I'm all for incremental processes along the way. However, we have a big problem here because on one side of the mouse, we're all saying preborn children have equal value and equal rights. And on the other side of our mouth, we're literally preventing any bill that would actually make the number one offender. 70% of abortions now are self-managed with abortion pills from mothers who order them, take them, and incur these abortions, right? But I'm not sure how we protect these babies. Look, and I get it. It used to be that preborn children were only being killed in abortuaries. And so it makes perfect sense to just stop the killing at abortuaries and make it illegal to get them abortions in abortuaries. That's not the case anymore. You mentioned Florida and 40% drop, I think the statute mentioned, with drop in abortions. I hate to tell you, but that is not an accurate statistic because it does not take into account self-managed abortion. The polling came out from actually Danco, the abortion pill manufacturer themselves, said there was nearly 30,000 self-managed abortions in Texas, a state that has outlawed it from conception. And so it's just wild to me. You said, mothers have been conditioned to believe it's just a clump of cells. And so what's wild to me is that, okay, what's the difference here? A man who coerces his girlfriend, a man who poisons his girlfriend, giving her an abortion pill, has he not been conditioned by society to believe it's also just a clump of cells? Yet we think, you and I both think, that we all believe he should get punishments. Why not everybody involved? Has he not been lied to, that he has been taught, inculcated by society for however long, that it's just a clump of cells? But it seems like there's some discrepancy. And I don't know if it's just feminism that has taught us that women should get special treatment, that women aren't to be held accountable. And that's this cultural effect. But it seems to me really duplicitous that we would hold a father guilty of murder for inducing an abortion on a mother, but not the mother if she did the same thing. The last thing I'll say is this, and what everybody needs to know is when Ray says we can't hold any women accountable legally for the death of her own child, right now in Texas, if an abortionist, don't ask me how this would be possible, but if she could perform a surgical abortion on herself in the state of Texas in the 9th month of pregnancy, there would be 0 punishments for her. She could do it right in front of a police officer. And not only does the law hold her completely absolved from any criminal liability, but the pro-life movement itself. I think this is a massive problem that we have fundamentally and ideologically going forward. And if we can't agree on ideology, we can never agree on what the end goal will be.
So that's interesting, AJ. So what you're saying is if there was a woman who was an abortionist, she could perform, if this was possible, she could perform an abortion on herself at 9 months. And as of right now, she would face no consequence, even though abortion at 9 months is obviously illegal in Texas.
0. Because we don't want to make mothers accountable.
This is the problem that we face regularly in our states with this kind of argument. I mean, we go from the practical to fantasy, where a woman is aborting herself at 9 months. This is the argument that has to be made to justify putting women in jail. That is beyond fantastical. And it serves no one. It doesn't help any. We keep talking about the abortion pill. Let's work to stop it being spread across the country. Help us, join us in fighting shield laws and updating REMS on mifepristone. I mean, these are all things that we are currently doing at National Right to Life and many of our organizations that join us. But instead, we're talking about women aborting themselves at 9 months to make a point for a law that has no chance of being enacted. And it's fundraising fodder to the other side. There's currently a case in South Carolina where a woman who was 6.5 months pregnant aborted herself. Now, the baby survived. The baby's alive, thank God. And she's been arrested for child endangerment, for lots of different things. If you belong to any kind of email list for any of the pro-aborts, which I recommend every pro-lifer to do, that has been just filling up our mailbox. Woman arrested for having an abortion in South Carolina. And this is a woman who clearly has committed a crime. I mean, she has clearly committed a crime. Now imagine if we do that again to a 19-year-old who, for whatever reason, had an abortion that we missed getting to her in time. We lose.
But I think the thing that you're not realizing that this isn't some fiction. Women are already self-managing abortions all over Texas. I mean, you mentioned trying to outlaw mifepristone and put regulations on mifepristone. We don't even need mifepristone. All you got to do is go on TikTok and there is herbal abortifacient recipes. I mean, people have been using herbs for centuries.
Yes. And one of the problems that we have been working on, National Right to Life has been working on, if you're anywhere in Texas and you cross into one of the border towns on the Mexican side, when you first get there, you get through immigration as an American tourist going shopping for the day. The first thing you see are lines and lines and lines of pharmacies. And we have been fighting for some kind of regulation at the border, which thanks to President Trump, we're starting to see people just go to those and stock up on mifepristone, not just mifepristone, but lots of abortifacients, of which there are many abortifacients. And we are fighting every day at every chance we get to keep women from getting their hands on this drug.
But you're making my argument for me because, like, you can ship abortive pills in a teddy bear. I mean, so you're essentially saying that we can't make the action illegal. We need this new drug war, right? I mean, how effective has the war on drugs been in general? And I believe in the war on drugs. I think we should make it illegal to use hard drugs. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't want to make the underlying crime of illegal, there will be stockpiles of abortifacients that will be shipped into, like right now in Texas, just so everyone knows, a woman, it's completely legal. She can order pills online from other states, and it's not illegal for her to get those pills and take them because the pro-life movement only wants to go after pill manufacturers, but there's a massive jurisdictional issue as to enforcement on this. Perfect example, last month in New York, prescribed abortion pills to a woman in Texas. They filed just as merely misdemeanor charges against this abortionist, by the way. And New York just laughed it off and said, okay, well, come and get her. Like, we're not going to enforce this. What I'm asking is, how can we protect these women if we can't actually make it illegal and we're not willing to make it illegal? This does nothing to protect these women. If the underlying crime of abortion is actually not a crime, so many women come up to me that are post-abortive and they say, man, if it was just illegal, I would have been able to tell my boyfriend. I can't do this because the law would have protected me. But instead, it's completely legal and no criminal sanctions against either the husband, the boyfriend, the sex trafficker, the pimp, or myself because the underlying law will not protect them.
Okay. It's not our position that women should go to jail. I will say that forever and ever.
Fundamentally, can I ask you why? I mean, you said it's unjust to do so. I looked up the federal law. What's the federal punishment for killing a dog in America? It's up to 7 years in prison for killing a dog in America. And it just baffles me that we think it's unjust to give the same rights and protections to preborn children if their mothers kill them that we would give to a dog.
No, we continue to lose ground when we fight abortions only in the law books. We've got to fight abortion in the people's hearts. And I think that's the overall sense that we should really concentrate on. Let's change the culture. Let's make abortion unthinkable. You said, For centuries, women have been committing abortions. I get that. We know that. But again, if we're building a culture of life, we've got to make it something that's tangible. We've got to reach out to these women in their places of need. Every abortion is a failure of the pro-life movement. I think if you were to look at it that way, which we do, we really believe that every abortion is our failure for not getting to that girl, for having, not used our time well in the last 60 years, making sure that she understands that that is a tiny human, a little baby that she's killing. We have failed at that. And now we want to put women in jail because we have failed at our jobs. I mean, that's kind of like the mindset that the vast majority of pro-lifers share in this country. We have to make it so that no woman thinks that abortion is her only way out. And we're not going to do that by threatening, to put her in jail. Let's start by unenacting these shield laws so that these people who kill via mail in New York, in Illinois, in California, they no longer have cover. We have got to get rid of that cover.
But they're just going to be shipped in from India, from China, from Mexico. So then you're saying we should just inspect the mail. I mean, this is just infeasible. And you talk about practical perspective. I just can't see how this is even possible.
I think it's more practical to check the mail than to prosecute. I mean, and we get down to the nitty-gritty of these laws is the prosecutorial aspect of the law, like the one in Louisiana. It's very vague. It doesn't actually say how it is that we get to women who we suspect. I mean, the law in Louisiana said that a husband, an ex-boyfriend could report their significant other female for having had an abortion. Well, we have the Fourth Amendment. She has some right to not submit herself to all of the tests. We have HIPAA laws. How is this even prosecuted? Now I'll pose that question to you. How do you prosecute women? What does that look like? Let's say you have a state passes this law. It's now women can be put in jail for procuring an abortion, whether it be through an abortuary or how do you go after her?
This same way you go after a woman who kills their born child, right? As the pro-life movement doesn't believe a woman should be held accountable for inducing abortion in the 9th month. But then if she aborts the child a month later after it's out of the womb, she's held liable. I mean, it's simple. So how do you make it illegal? The same way you make anything else illegal.
Okay, let's make an assumption, AJ, that the law has now passed. Say the state of Louisiana. That law is now the law of the state of Louisiana. Walk me through how a woman gets prosecuted for having had an abortion under this law.
Yeah, the same way you would prosecute anybody for homicide.
Okay, so how would you prosecute?
A mother kills her child. There's a preponderance of evidence that she's done so.
How is that evidence gathered?
Okay, well, there's text messages. There's plenty of evidence from a father's testimony. So let me give you an example. Okay, say, heaven forbid, I have a girlfriend. I'm trying to save the life of my child. She's hell-bent on killing her child. She says, I don't care about the law. I'm going to kill my baby anyway. I have evidence that she's done so. She's told me that. I mean, I have video evidence because I recorded the conversation. I have physical evidence because I have the pill wrappers. I see her do it. I bring this evidence to the authorities. An investigation ensues. There's a high level of due process, just like in every other circumstance or situation. I don't see how it's any different than a baby just comes out at home and then she strangles the child and then same investigation would incur.
Right.
Sure.
There's a body when that happens. She can say none of this of what he's saying is true. He is an AI genius and he can recreate text. He can recreate wrappers. He can recreate every piece of evidence that he's suggesting. So this man has now gone to the police and said, I believe my girlfriend, my wife, has had an abortion. It's illegal in Louisiana. Here's all the evidence. The police begins an investigation. What does that investigation entail?
Same investigation it would be in any other case. There would be due process. There would be probably a higher amount of due process. Women do have bodies. I mean, these bodies don't go away.
No, but there's no dead baby for the police to go and say, using your example of her delivering a 9-month-old, wrapping, killing it. Okay, there's a body. There's actual, like evidence of it.
Not always. I mean, how many times do women throw babies away?
But how does the police investigate this girl who's had a chemical abortion, who's poisoned her baby, flushed that poor little body down the drain? Her boyfriend accuses of it. She's saying he's full of crap. None of this is true. Where does it go on? But let's say the police find credible evidence that they think, what is the next legal step? Is she arrested?
Yeah, well, of course, when she kills her child and there's a preponderance of evidence that she's done so, the same way that she would do it in any other case, right? So many times there's no body. I mean, Scott Peterson, there was no bodies for a long time. But let's be clear here. We would not have an over prosecutory, totalitarian, over anxious DA situation where women are being prosecuted for no reason. Realistically, we would have an enforcement problem. So that tends to actually prove my point is that the issue that we're going to have here is most women wouldn't be prosecuted. Most women, but that shouldn't be a deciding factor as to whether or not we should make it illegal.
So what percentage do you see being prosecuted?
I don't know. I believe in a high level of due process. I believe that our common law comes from biblical law, which is has a very high level of standard of evidence, two or three witnesses. This is where what our whole justice system came from. And our justice system as is based on the presumption of innocence, right? So rather 100 murderers go free than an innocent man get prosecuted, right? So there would have to be a high preponderance of evidence that would prove this, right? You would have to prove that. And so, but it would be difficult to prove that. But the difficulties of proving murder doesn't absolve us from making laws against murder.
I absolutely agree. We need to realize is what the process is.
What do you think is different about a woman who kills her child that makes it impossible to make it illegal to do so?
No, I just think that it would be absolutely incredibly difficult to prove something like this.
Tell us why.
It turns into a he said, she said,
Why?
because it can.
How is this any different than a child abuse case or a beat up boyfriend, a domestic violence? Like anything could turn into a he said, she said. I'm not understanding how a woman who willfully kills her child makes it impossible for us to ever prosecute. Like, can you square that circle for me?
No, no. The prosecution's easy. You need a willing cop and a willing DA to prosecute. It's convincing a jury that this happened. You're talking about witnesses. And here's what I don't think a lot of people who support this understand. The visual, the optics of having a 16, 17, 18-year-old girl in a court where, her best friends come up and said, yeah, she told me that. Yeah. I mean, what that does to the American psyche is unbelievable. Why? Because we have failed. We have failed to convince the American public that what this girl did is the killing and taking of an unborn child. So all the American public is going to see, the vast majority, even many pro-lifers who have voted for pro-life candidates, all they're going to see is a 17-year-old girl being charged for a crime that she may or may not have committed, where the evidence is not strong, and we lose.
Well, Ray and AJ, obviously, as we fight to defend the lives of the unborn, there's going to be natural times where we disagree on strategy and certain issues. But let's focus now on some of the things that we agree on. What are some things that we can do together to ensure that we end abortion?
I love this question. I mean, one thing I would love to work with Ray on is we're getting killed right now at the state level with ballot initiatives, right? So many states like Michigan, Ohio, they've tried Missouri. Missouri went from life at conception to abortion through all 9 months being enshrined in the state constitution. This is absolute insanity. Tragic that this is happening. So, I mean, regardless of whether we agree on the prosecutorial aspect of things, I think anything that is like a defensive position to where we can work out together to defend innocent life by defeating these pro-choice ballot initiatives that are killing the pro-life movement at the moment.
Listen, ballot initiatives are the bane of my existence, having just gone through one in Florida. And we're so fortunate that we have a 60% threshold in this state. Honestly, it's the only reason that we have our law. But we have an entire team at National Right to Life who does nothing but go state to state to state to state, visiting with state directors, visiting with huge coalitions of pro-lifers on how to fight these initiatives. We were instrumental in Nebraska, another state where we won, one of the few. And this is so important because it's to the crux of the issue. While we were here in Florida fighting Amendment 4 last election cycle, the pro-aborts, one of their favorite acts was they're going to put your daughters in jail. We had to fight that. I mean, I've never thought that women should go to jail for having an abortion. I think there's lots of other things that we can do for them. But it was used against us. What had happened in Louisiana, that was a big ad for theirs, and it resonated well with the people of Florida. So that goes to show that this is not an issue that we can win in the public square. It's just not going to happen. And absolutely, we're working very hard on these midterms and looking forward to 2028. We are in a world of hurt if, God forbid, a Republican doesn't win the White House again in 28. And ballot initiatives are killing us. Why? Because in some states, we are outfunded 100 to 1. I mean, for every dollar that we spend, they manage to raise $100. Why? Because the vast abortion industrial complex wants nothing more than to make abortion as accessible as possible. And listen, we know that abortion is the intentional killing of an unborn child. We know that. We've just got to get to these women so that they don't ever think that that's their only option.
Well, Ray and AJ, it's been a great program. Thank you both so much for coming on.
God is good.
Thanks for having me. Thanks so much for Ray for hopping on here, man. And yeah, I think we want a similar thing. I don't know about maybe the same thing, but I'm definitely glad that you're willing to sacrifice. So your life has shown that you're willing to sacrifice to protect children, even put your body in front of the abortionist. So that, in my mind, clears up any type of question about your character, brother. And I'll fight alongside with you any day.
Thank you.
Today's conversation has been a great opportunity to hear from both sides of what is admittedly a fairly contentious debate within pro-life circles, but it's also a reminder that, yes, it's natural, we're going to have some disagreements, and we might get heated toward each other from time to time, but at the end of the day, this isn't a knives-out thing. We are on the same team. We're all fighting in the same direction, which is to end abortion. We may have some slight differences of opinion and ideas about how strategically we ought to move forward, but for the vast majority of cases, we all in the pro-life movement, we're in lockstep and we agree. So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. If you'd like to learn more from either of our guests, we'll have resources available from them both at lifeissues.org. Again, that's lifeissues.org. Be sure to tune in next week for another Straight Talk on Life Issues.